Welcome to VMOD in the Spotlight. My name is Stace, I'm the technical evangelist at Varnish Software, and today we're going to put the Accept VMOD in the spotlight. Perhaps some context first. The term VMOD is short for Varnish module, and this module is a library written in C that contains functions, logic, and can wrap around other third-party libraries. By importing a compiled VMOD into VCL, these capabilities, these functions, and this logic become available in VCL. By doing this, you not only extend the VCL language, you also add specific functionality which improves the overall experience. Now let's get back to the Accept VMOD. This VMOD sanitizes content negotiation headers. These HTTP request headers are emitted by your web client, your browser for example, and they announce specific capabilities when it comes to interpreting content. The application can read these headers and negotiate what kind of content, in which format, which language, the output is sent. It is important that we sanitize this, because otherwise we could end up with many copies of the same content. So it's basically about content deduplication. Let's focus on a very specific use case. Imagine that you have a website that presents content in multiple languages, but using the same URL structures. The way it determines what language to present is based on the browser language, which is exposed to the accept language header. So imagine that a French-speaking person visits the website. It will probably be present in its accept language header, and it's up to the application to then present the right content. But if Varnish is in the midst of it and caches this object, it has no awareness of the multilingual aspect. So what happens next is that this object will be stored in cache. But the next visitor who visits the same URL, who happens to be English-speaking, gets presented with a cache hit with content in French. This is unacceptable. So the way we solve this is through cache variations. This can be written in VCL, but there's also a conventional header for this. This header is called the vary header, and it accepts a valid request header. So in this case, we would specify in our application as a response header, vary accept language. Varnish would see this, and for each URL, depending on every language the browser presents, it would then serve the right object from cache and create the necessary cache variations. This solves a first problem, but there's a second problem that appears. Namely that there could be too many variations of the cache depending on the value of the accept language header. Let's look at some VCL code to learn how we can leverage VMOD accept. Before we start sanitizing this input header, we need to ensure that the cache variation takes place. We can assume that the origin web application will expose a vary accept language header, but better safe than sorry. If it did, we'll leave it as is and Varnish will leverage it. If not, we'll either append accept language to an existing vary header or create a new vary header. This all happens in VCL backend response. But knowing that this accept language string can vary from browser to browser, could have multiple orderings, could have an infinite amount of opportunities, we know we're at risk in terms of cache variations. So what you can see that we do is we import the accept module, and inside VCL init, we provide the whitelist. So we initialize an object called lang, which is triggered to accept.rule, and the rule says that EN, English, is the default language. We can start adding other language. So in this case, we add English, Dutch, French, and German. Now you see that there's two occurrences of English. The first one, accept.rule, is the fallback. So if there is none other, it will accept that one. By doing language.addEnglish, we also assume that English is a valid primary candidate before relying on the fallback. So what happens next is in VCL receive, which happens when we receive the request, we start filtering the accept language header. We put it through lang.filter, we give rec.http accept language as the input, and the output is a sanitized version, which will either contain EN, NL, FR, or DE. And those values, the values that I initialized in VCL init, should represent the languages that are supported by our application. Any language that is not supported will fall back on English. So in this case, my browser value contains Dutch and English, but English is set first, so English will be the value. If I were to change this and make Dutch my primary language of my browser, then the Dutch variation would be created. But if I were to use an Italian locale inside my accept language header, I will fall back to English. And that's how you ensure that you have the proper cache variations, meaning that you strike the right balance between having the variations and still having a decent hit rate and avoid cache poisoning. So that was it. That was the Accept VMOD in the Spotlight. There'll be more videos like this and more VMODs that we'll put in the Spotlight. Thank you for checking it out and see you next time.